He had ridden for weeks searching. She found them grazing on her own grass. The first thing I knew when I came back to myself was the smell of pine tar soap and wood smoke, and I thought for a moment I was a boy again, in my mother's kitchen in Missouri. Then I tried to move my arm, and the pain told me I was not a boy and not in Missouri, and I stayed very still and let the ceiling above me come into focus. It was a plank ceiling. Someone had chinked the gaps with what looked like horsehair and river clay. The work was careful, the kind of work you do when you mean to stay somewhere. I did not know where I was. The last thing I could put in order was the snow. 3 days out of Laramie, maybe 4, the weather had come down off the Big Horn so fast and so low there was no seeing the difference between the ground and the sky. I remember thinking that the 2 horses would be all right because horses can smell the cold and they had more sense than me, and then I remember nothing after that. I turned my head. A window. Gray light outside, afternoon or early morning, I couldn't tell. A small iron stove in the corner, door closed, the tick and settle of something burning in it. A chair beside the bed with a folded flour sack on the seat and a tin cup on the sack, steam still coming off it. Someone had been here recently. I heard boots on a board floor, somewhere past the door. I lay there and let my body report to me what it had learned in my absence. My right foot, wrapped tight, no feeling at its outer edge where the 2 smallest toes sat. Frostbite then. My left shoulder had a bandage across the upper part of it, and below the bandage I could feel a heat that meant infection working at something, a cut or a puncture I didn't recall getting. My face felt stretched and sore on one side. My lips were cracked dry. I am 63 years old, and my body has been reporting damage to me for 40 of those years. I know what it sounds like. This was not the worst report I'd ever received, but it was not a good one. The door opened. She came in carrying a wood bucket, and she stopped when she saw my eyes open. She was maybe 50, maybe a little older, a woman with dark hair going gray at the temples and a face that had seen a lot of weather without complaining about it. Strong hands, the knuckles a little rough. She wore a canvas work coat that was too large for her in the shoulders, a man's coat, and her boots were good ones, cared for. She set the bucket down. She said, "You're awake." I said my throat was dry. She picked up the tin cup and brought it over and held it where I could reach it. Water, not coffee, cold water from the bucket. I drank most of it and she took the cup back and set it on the chair. "Your horses are in my barn," she said. "That's where I found you, face down in the snow about 40 yards past the fence line. I thought at first you were dead." "What made you think different?" "You swore at me when I rolled you over." "I didn't remember that. What did I say?" The corner of her mouth moved. Nothing original. She went to the stove and did something with the iron door and came back. She was not a woman who wasted motion. Everything she did had a sequence to it, the way a person moves when they've been doing things alone for a long time and have worked out the most efficient path from one task to the next. I said, "How long?" 4 days. The first 2 you were out completely. The 3rd day you talked some, but nothing I could make sense of. Names mostly. "Whose names?" She looked at me straight. I didn't recognize any of them. That was either good or bad. I couldn't decide. "The foot," I said. "You'll keep it. 2 toes I'm not sure of yet. The shoulder was a nail. From what I can tell, you rode into it or fell into it. Something went through the coat and coat liner and into the muscle. I cleaned it and it's draining now. Another day or 2 and we'll know." She sat down in the chair beside the bed, not because she was tired, I thought, but because she had decided this conversation would take a while and she would be comfortable for it. "I'm Cecilia Vane," she said. "This is my ranch, what's left of it." I told her my name, Calvin Marsh. She nodded as if she was filing it away somewhere. "Where were you headed?" "Billings." "You were 3 days south of Billings when I found you." "I know." She waited for more, and I didn't give it, and she didn't press. She picked up the cup and went out, and I heard the sound of water being poured somewhere, and she came back and set the cup on the chair and went out again. That was all for that day. I had ridden out of a place called Cutter's Fork in Colorado 5 weeks before, looking for 2 horses, a sorrel mare and a blue roan gelding, both carrying my brand, a broken ring on the left hip, both taken in the night by men I did not see clearly enough to describe to a sheriff, though if I am honest, I did not try very hard to describe them to a sheriff. I am a man who has spent the better part of his life solving problems, without involving sheriffs. I was 3 years retired from that life when the horses were taken. 3 years on a scrap of land outside Cutter's Fork, trying to make something grow, which it largely refused to do, and keeping mostly to myself, which came naturally. My nearest neighbor was 4 miles. I went into town once a week for supplies and spoke to as few people as possible and went home. I did not have friends. I had a dog named Post, who was old and slept most of the day, and I had the 2 horses, and I had a rifle I kept clean, and a habit of watching whatever came up the road long before it arrived. That was my life. I had decided it was enough. The men who took my horses had no way of knowing what I was. In Cutter's Fork I was Calvin Marsh, who kept to himself and paid his bills and didn't cause trouble. They took the horses because they were good horses and they were there and no one was watching. They were wrong about that last part. I tracked them north for 3 weeks. I found the sorrel mare in a trading post outside a town called Rawlins, sold to a man who didn't know she was stolen and gave her back without a fuss when I showed him the brand and explained the situation quietly. The roan was further north, sold again, working cattle on a small operation near Casper. I bought him back for $20, which was more than I wanted to spend but less trouble than the other thing. The men who'd taken them had moved on. I followed their trail another week before the weather came down. I am 63 years old and I had tracked 2 men through 3 states in 5 weeks in the beginning of winter to recover 2 horses that were worth, between them, maybe $80. I've thought about that. I think it wasn't about the horses. I think I was looking for something to be. Something I knew how to be. The 3 years in Cutter's Fork were quiet and I had decided quiet was enough. And then the horses were gone and I was in the saddle before I'd finished thinking about it, moving north in the dark, following a track I could read in the dirt, my hands remembering everything I had told them to forget. I don't think that reflects well on me, but it's true. She brought broth the second day in a deep bowl and helped me sit up enough to drink it, and her hands under my shoulder were careful and strong, and she did not apologize for the pain she couldn't avoid causing. "You own this place alone?" I asked. 8 years. "Where'd your husband go?" She looked at me the way you look at a man who's asked a rude question but asked it plainly enough that you'll answer it. "He didn't go anywhere. He died." "Sorry." "It was 8 years ago," she said. "I've had time to get used to it." There was something in the way she said it that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite acceptance. It was something in between, something a person arrives at after a long time of working through something alone. I recognized it because I have some of that same quality in me, I think, from different reasons. "Ranch been running since then?" I asked. "Running might be generous." She sat down with the empty bowl in her lap. "I had cattle, lost most of them 2 winters back to the cold and what the cold brought, wolves and worse. I've got 11 head now and I'm breeding back up. My son helps when he can. He's got his own place 30 miles east. My daughter's in Cheyenne." "They want you to sell." It was not a question. She looked at me. "My daughter does," she said. "My son understands. He grew up here." "You don't want to sell?" "No, simple. No explanation. As if the reasons were so obvious they didn't need saying." I understood that too. She took the bowl and went out. I lay there in the gray light and listened to the sound of the ranch. A cow somewhere, wind against the planks, a door closing in the distance, her boots on the steps outside. The sounds of a place being kept alive by one person through stubbornness and knowing no other way. I thought about Cutter's Fork, the land that wouldn't grow, the dog that slept, the once-a-week trip to town and speaking to as few people as possible. I thought about how quiet it was and how I had called it enough. On the fourth day, I sat up by myself, and the room only tilted a little. She came in and saw me and brought the chair and sat down without comment. "Tell me about the shoulder," I said. "Tell me why there's a bullet scar on your back from what looks like at least 2 separate occasions," she said. "A fair trade." "I was a lawman for a while," I said. "Before that I was other things. Some of the scars are from the lawman years and some are from the other things. And now I'm a man who keeps to himself outside of Cutter's Fork, Colorado. Who rides into Wyoming in a blizzard chasing stolen horses." "The same." She was quiet a moment, not judging, thinking. There's a difference and I've had enough of both to know which is which. "The shoulder is healing," she said. "The infection broke last night. You'll have the use of it. The toes. One is fine, the other I think you'll lose it. It's black to the nail bed. But one toe is a small thing to lose." It was. I've lost bigger things and kept walking. "I need to pay you for your trouble," I said. "I didn't set a price." "Name one." She looked at me for a moment, not at my face exactly, at something near it or behind it. "You can earn it," she said, "when you're well enough. I've got fence to run before the next hard freeze and a well pump that needs replacing. My son was supposed to come 3 weeks ago and he hasn't." "When I'm well enough," I said. "That's what I said." She got up and went to the stove and came back with the tin cup and handed it to me, coffee this time. Real coffee. I hadn't tasted it in weeks, out on the trail, and it was good in the way that basic things are good when you've been without them. I held the cup in both hands and looked at her. "You brought a stranger inside your house," I said. "A stranger you found face down in the snow." "Yes." "Doesn't scare you?" "Everything scares me a little," she said. "That's not the same as it stopping me." She picked up the flour sack from the seat of the chair and folded it and went out. The fence first. It took me until the 7th day to be upright without the room moving, and 2 more days to be on my feet for any useful length of time, and by the 10th day I could walk the perimeter of the yard without stopping. My foot was wrapped, and the missing toe was a careful absence I was learning to compensate for, a new way of balancing my weight on that side. She gave me a pair of her late husband's work boots, which were a half-size small but better than my own, which were cracked through after the weeks of wet weather. I didn't say anything about whose boots they were, and neither did she. We rode out on the 11th day to look at the fence line. She had a good eye for the land, knew exactly where the weak sections were and in what order they needed tending. She didn't tell me what to do. She showed me what she saw and let me figure out the method. That suited me. I don't work well with people who explain the obvious. We worked side by side for 3 days on the south fence and 2 on the north. Hard work in cold weather, the kind of work that empties your head and leaves you honest. By the end of each day I was tired in a clean way. Not the worn thin tired of the trail, but the tired of a man who's used himself for something that matters. She cooked in the evening. Good food, plain and sufficient. We ate at the table in the kitchen and she talked a little about the cattle, about her son's operation to the east, about a neighbor dispute over a water right 2 years back that she'd settled by riding to the man's property and explaining her position until he agreed. She didn't elaborate on how exactly she'd explained it, and I didn't ask. I talked some too, more than I usually do. Something about the cold outside and the warmth of the kitchen and the food. Something about having been alone a long time and suddenly not being, it loosened something. I told her about Cutter's Fork, the land that didn't grow much, post the dog who by now had probably been fed by my nearest neighbor, a woman named Hadley who felt sorry for him. I told her about the quiet and how I had told myself it was sufficient. She listened the way a person listens when they're interested and not just waiting to talk. It's a specific quality of attention. I had not been on the receiving end of it in a long while. "You don't think it was sufficient," she said. Not a question. A thing she'd heard in what I hadn't said. "I thought I did," I said. "That's different." "Yes," I said, "that's different." The fire in the stove, the wind against the roof, two people at a table in a kitchen in Wyoming with the dark pressing against the windows. The pump took 4 days and a trip into town for a part, which she made herself while I stayed at the ranch and mucked the barn and fed the 11 cattle and got reacquainted with my horses, who were fat and rested and faintly contemptuous of me for having gotten myself nearly killed in a snowstorm. I spent some time with the roan, running my hand down his neck and talking to him the way you talk to an animal when no one else is around to hear you make a fool of yourself. I told him I wasn't sure what I was doing here. I told him the woman was competent and sensible and had brought me back from the edge of something, and I didn't know what that meant or whether it meant anything. He didn't have a useful opinion. She came back from town in the late afternoon, and I helped her carry the part in from the wagon, and we set up for the pump work in the fading light, and she stopped and said we should do it tomorrow, and I agreed, and we went inside. She'd brought flour and a small cured ham and coffee beans, and a jar of something preserved that turned out to be apple butter. She put it all away in a way that was so practiced, it was almost invisible, each thing going exactly where it belonged, and then she poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the table and sat down. I sat across from her. "You've done good work," she said. It is a plain thing to say to a man, 4 words, "You've done good work." I have been thanked in various ways in my life and in various currencies, and I would not have thought 4 plain words would land the way those 4 landed. But she said them looking straight at me, no softness in it, no performance, just a woman who had watched carefully and reached a conclusion and was stating it. The way you say something you mean. Something shifted in my chest. I didn't say anything. "Better than my son would have done," she said. "He's a good man, but he doesn't read the fence the way you do. You can see where it's going to fail before it fails." "Old habit," I said. "From the lawman years." "From before." She nodded, not pressing. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Her hands, I had noticed, were always doing something, not nervous, just occupied. A woman whose hands knew they were needed. "You're going to Billings," she said. I was. The men I was following will be long gone by now. Whether like this, they've moved on or they've died. Either way, there's nothing waiting for me in Billings. What's waiting for you in Cutter's Fork? I thought about it, the land that didn't grow, the dog old and sleeping, the silence I had told myself was enough. "Post," I said, "the dog. That's all. That's all." She looked at me for a long moment. This was not the look of a woman deciding something. I think she had decided it already, somewhere in the 4 days I was unconscious, or the 2 weeks of fence line and pump work and evenings in the kitchen. This was the look of a woman who has decided something and is taking a breath before she says it. "I'd like you to stay," she said. I did not say anything. "Not for the work," she said. "The work is done. I can hire the next thing that needs doing when it needs doing. I'm asking you to stay because I want you to. Because it's been a long time since I wanted something for myself, and I'm old enough to know the difference between wanting something for practical reasons and wanting it for real." I put my coffee cup down on the table. Outside, the wind was picking up again. I could hear it working at the corners of the house, testing the work she and I had both done on the boards and the chinked gaps. "I'm not an easy man to be around," I said. "I noticed. I have a history that's not simple." I gathered. "You don't know the half of it." "I know enough," she said. "I know what a man looks like when he's carrying things. I know what it looks like when he sets them down long enough to work, and what it looks like when he picks them back up at night. I know what it looks like when a man hasn't been in a warm place in a long time and doesn't know if he's allowed to want one. She stopped the wind, the stove. You did good work, she said again, quieter this time. You took my fence and you saw it the way I see it, like it was yours to take care of. You ate at my table and talked like a man who is still living inside himself and not just watching the days go by. That's not nothing. At our age, that's not nothing at all. I am 63 years old. I have done things I will not name in any kitchen. I have been in rooms where the air was full of things that were about to go badly wrong, and I have been colder and more alone than I knew a man could be and still find his way to morning. I am not a man who cries, but my throat closed up on me, and I had to look at my hands on the table for a moment. I said I'd have to go back for the dog. She said, obviously. And I'd need to settle things with the land, probably sell it or let it go back. It's not much. I know. If I come back here after all that, I stopped. I'm not talking about being a hired hand. I know what you're talking about, she said. I looked up at her. She was looking at me the way she'd looked at the fence line when she first showed me the weak places, direct and without fuss, knowing exactly what she was seeing and knowing it needed tending, and not being embarrassed about any of it. I watched you for 2 weeks, she said, and you're the most careful man I've met in 40 years. You don't waste emotion. You don't waste a word. You looked at my cattle like they mattered, and you looked at my fence like it mattered, and you looked at me like I mattered. You can't fake that. A man either sees what's in front of him or he doesn't, and you do. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Her hand was warm from the coffee cup, rough on the knuckles, softer on the palm. She left it there and didn't say anything else. The wind was testing the eaves. The stove ticked. I turned my hand over and held hers. I left on a Thursday. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, that hard winter blue that you only get at altitude when the air is scrubbed clean and cold, and the horses were glad to be moving. Both of them, the roan and the sorrel, side by side stepped light, relieved to have a direction. She came out to the yard when I rode out. She stood at the fence with her canvas coat on and her hands in the pockets, and she watched me go. I looked back once at the gap in the fence line, and she was still standing there, neither waving nor turning away, just watching, a woman who had decided something and was steady in it. It is 200 miles to Cutter's Fork. In good weather, 10 days. In December, more. I rode south with the roan and the sorrel and the big horns to my left going white, and the sky going dark at the edges by 3 in the afternoon. And I thought about the plank ceiling with the careful chinked gaps, and the table in the kitchen and her hands. I thought about what she'd said, that at our age that's not nothing. She was right. She was exactly right about that. I rode 4 days before the trail took me through Rawlins, where I'd found the sorrel 6 weeks before. I stopped at the trading post for supplies, and the man behind the counter looked at me and looked at the horses and said, wasn't I the fella who'd come through after the stolen sorrel? And I said yes. And he said he was glad she'd been returned to her rightful owner. I thought about that word. Rightful. I thought about what it meant to have things that were rightfully yours. The land in Cutter's Fork was mine in the way a piece of paper says something is yours. The horses were mine because I knew their habits and their needs, and they came when I called and trusted me enough to stand in the cold while I worked. I thought about whether a place could be rightfully yours without any paper saying so, whether belonging somewhere was a thing you discovered or a thing you built. I think it's both. I think you discover it and then you build it, and then it's yours in the way nothing on paper ever quite is. Post was at Hadley's, as I'd figured. He was fat and slow, and he looked at me with the expression of a dog who has been comfortable and is not entirely pleased about the disruption. I carried him home, and he slept on the floor by the stove like always while I looked at the 4 walls. 3 years I'd told myself this was sufficient. It was not sufficient. It had never been sufficient. I had convinced myself of something that was not true because the true thing required wanting it, and I had not let myself want things in a long time. I sold the land in 9 days. The price was less than it was worth, but more than I expected, and the man who bought it needed land, and I needed to leave before winter closed the trail north again. I shook his hand and loaded what I was keeping into the wagon I'd borrowed from Hadley. Not much: the rifle, some tools, my father's watch, a box of papers, and I lifted Post into the wagon seat because his hips were bad and the step was too high. I tied the roan and the sorrel to the back of the wagon. I took the north road out of Cutter's Fork on a morning when the thermometer read 11 degrees, and the wagon wheels crunched on the frozen ground, and the horse's breath came in long white puffs in the cold air. Post sat beside me on the wagon seat with his nose working at the wind. Old dog in the cold. He had his blanket folded under him, and he squinted into the north like he was seeing something I couldn't see yet. Maybe he was. I made it back in 13 days. Weather held mostly, and the roads were passable, and the horses were strong from their time in her barn. I came over the low ridge south of her property in the early afternoon, and I could see the smoke from her chimney from half a mile out, a thin straight line going up into the pale sky. The cattle were in the near pasture, all 11 of them, bunched at the south end near the water. The fence I'd run was holding. She came out of the barn when she heard the wagon. She had a bucket in her hand, and she set it down when she saw me come over the ridge, and she stood and waited while I brought the wagon down to the yard. I set the brake and climbed down. Post stayed on the seat. His hips wouldn't take the jump. She walked over and looked at him, and then looked at me. "That's Post," I said. "He looks like a post," she said. She reached up and scratched behind his ear, and he leaned into it with his eyes closed, shameless as always about being fussed over. She turned to me. The afternoon light was flat and cold, and it hit the side of her face, and I could see the lines around her eyes and the gray in her hair and all the weather and the work and the 8 years alone in those things, and none of it subtracted from anything. It added up. It was all the same thing. She put her hand on my arm. Just that. Her hand on my arm in the yard in December with the smoke going up from the chimney, and the horses standing behind the wagon, and the old dog getting fussed over on the seat. "You came back," she said. "I said I would. Men say things." "I know," I said. "I came back." She nodded once slow, and the corner of her mouth moved in that way it had. Not quite a smile and more than one. I had ridden out of Cutter's Fork 38 days before to find 2 stolen horses, and I had found them, and I had nearly died in the finding, and I had been pulled back by a woman with rough hands and a plank ceiling. She chinked herself, and a way of looking at a man that made him want to be worth what she saw. She stepped to the side and looked up at the load in the wagon, the tools, the rifle in its case, the box of papers, the bedroll, the things a man brings when he is not coming for a visit. "You brought everything," she said. "Everything worth bringing," I said. She looked at me for a moment. Then she picked up the bucket from where she'd set it down and handed it to me. "The water trough in the barn needs filling," she said. "The pump's been working since you fixed it." I took the bucket. She held on to the handle for just a moment before she let go. Her eyes were steady, the way they always were, the way they'd been steady from the first day I was conscious enough to see them. Not soft, not hard, just clear. A woman looking at a man she had decided to keep and not making any apology about it. I went to the pump, I filled the bucket, I carried it to the barn. The pump worked just fine.